She entered the large music academy quietly, clutching her old notebook and trying not to draw attention. The morning sun touched the wide glass windows, making the grand hall glow warmly, but she barely noticed. Her steps were soft, her eyes searching the room filled with students who already seemed to know one another. Some were laughing, others tuning instruments, and a few looked like they had been here for years. She walked slowly to the back of the room, hoping no one would ask her questions. The grand piano in the middle caught her attention. It stood there like something sacred, polished, elegant, waiting. Her fingers twitched slightly. It had been months since she had touched one. The class began with introductions. The teacher, a tall man with a strict face, called each student by name. When it was her turn, she spoke softly, her voice almost lost among the chatter. I'm new, she said. I just joined. The teacher gave a polite nod but quickly moved on. To him, she seemed like another shy student who might not last long. He had seen many come and go, some with passion, others with dreams that faded when faced with hard work. She didn't strike him as someone special. After introductions, the teacher asked who wanted to play first. Hands shot up quickly. A confident boy walked up to the piano and played a loud, energetic tune. Everyone clapped. Then another student performed, followed by another. They were all good, practiced, polished, eager to impress. The new girl sat silently, her gaze fixed on the keys. She felt the familiar pull inside her chest, that quiet urge to play, but she didn't move. She told herself she wasn't ready. When the teacher looked around and asked, "Who's next?" a student from the front row spoke up with a grin. "What about the new girl?" Heads turned. She froze. Her heart started racing. "She hasn't played yet," another added, half smiling. The teacher looked at her. "Would you like to try something simple?" he asked in a tone that was kind but slightly doubtful. She shook her head politely. "Maybe another time." He nodded, but the smirks from the other students didn't go unnoticed. One whispered something under their breath that made another laugh. She felt her cheeks warm and she lowered her eyes. The rest of the class went on, but she barely heard anything. She just kept thinking about that one moment. The suggestion, the laughter, the feeling that people had already judged her without knowing who she was. After class ended, she stayed behind for a moment. The room grew quiet. The sunlight had shifted, and now only a few golden lines touched the piano lid. She slowly walked up to it. Her reflection appeared faintly on the shiny surface. Her fingers brushed over the keys gently, like touching something precious from a memory. She pressed one note softly. It rang through the empty room, clear, honest, beautiful. Then she stopped, afraid someone might walk in. She closed the lid carefully and stepped back. The next few days were much the same. She sat quietly in class, took notes, and kept to herself. When others practiced together, she stayed in the corner, pretending to read. Some students ignored her completely. Others whispered that maybe she was too shy to play, or maybe she didn't know how at all. What they didn't know was that she had spent years with the piano, years of long nights, quiet mornings, and memories filled with music. Her mother used to teach her when she was little. Those lessons weren't just about notes and scales. They were about feelings, stories, and listening with the heart. But after her mother passed away, she stopped performing. She still played alone, but only when no one could hear. Music became her secret, a language between her and the person she missed most. At the academy, she wanted a fresh start, but old habits stayed. She didn't want eyes on her or people judging her. She wanted to belong quietly, unnoticed. But fate, it seemed, had different plans. One morning, the teacher announced a new exercise. Each student would have to prepare a classical piece and play it in front of everyone by the end of the week. It was part of the academy's training to test skill, confidence, and expression. He handed out the sheet music. When she saw the notes, her eyes widened slightly. It was a famous composition, difficult even for advanced players. The kind of piece that demanded not just technique but understanding. Some students groaned. Others looked excited. "This one's tough," one boy said loudly. "I bet half the class won't make it past the first page." The teacher smiled slightly. "Then it's time to see who's serious," he said. As the days went by, the sound of practice filled the building. Pianos echoed from different rooms, each one repeating the same melody again and again, chasing perfection. She practiced quietly too, not in the main hall but in a small unused classroom at the back. The piano there was old with a few keys that stuck, but it was enough. She didn't use the sheet music. She already knew the piece by heart. Her fingers moved with ease, her body relaxed. Sometimes while she played, she forgot where she was. The music carried her somewhere else, back to her mother's living room where sunlight used to fall across the keys just like this. On the day of the performance, the air in the classroom was thick with tension. Everyone was nervous, trying to act confident. The teacher arranged the order and called names one by one. Students went up, played, and sat down again, some happy, some embarrassed. When it was almost over, one of the boys suddenly raised his hand and said, "Sir, she hasn't played yet." He nodded toward the back where she sat. She looked up quickly, startled. The teacher blinked as if he had forgotten she was even there. "Ah, yes," he said. "Would you like to try?" Her first instinct was to refuse. But when she saw the small, mocking smiles around her, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe it was courage she didn't know she still had. She stood up quietly. The room grew silent. Her footsteps echoed lightly as she approached the piano. She adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The first few notes came softly, almost uncertain. A few students exchanged glances. But then something changed. Her hands found their rhythm, smooth, precise, and full of emotion. The room that had been filled with whispers now had only music. Her fingers danced over the keys with grace and speed. Every note was clear, every pause meaningful. It wasn't just playing, it was storytelling. The melody rose and fell like a voice speaking through her. The teacher's face softened, his eyes following her movements closely. The students who had laughed before now sat perfectly still, watching in disbelief. The girl they thought couldn't play was now filling the room with something they couldn't even describe. When she reached the final notes, the sound lingered in the air like a memory refusing to fade. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the teacher slowly started to clap, and one by one, the others joined in. She stood, gave a small nod, and returned to her seat. Her heart was racing, but not from fear, from release. For the first time in years, she had played without hiding. After class, the teacher called her aside. His tone was gentler now. "You play beautifully," he said. "Where did you learn?" She hesitated before answering softly. "My mother taught me." He nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. "Keep practicing," he told her. "You have something special." She smiled faintly and left the room. Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm. She sat on a bench near the entrance, listening to the faint sounds of other students still practicing inside. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small. She just felt like herself again, the girl who loved the piano, who played not to impress but to remember. As she walked home, her mind replayed the performance again and again. The looks on their faces, the silence, the applause, all of it felt unreal. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. People had finally seen a glimpse of who she really was, though they still had no idea how deep her talent ran. She smiled quietly to herself as she reached her door. Tomorrow, everything at the academy would feel different. And yet she didn't think of fame or attention. All she thought about was her mother, how proud she would have been to see her play again. That thought alone made her eyes fill with tears, not of sadness but of peace. Inside her small room, she opened her notebook and began to write down a few notes, not musical ones, but words. Sometimes silence hides the loudest hearts. She placed her pen down, took one last look at the small piano sketch she had drawn years ago, and smiled again. Tomorrow she would play more. Tomorrow the world would listen, not because she wanted them to, but because she was finally ready to be heard. The next morning, the music academy felt different. When she walked into the main hall, the usual chatter stopped for a few seconds. A few students looked up, curious. Some smiled faintly, others whispered quietly to each other. It wasn't the same kind of whispering as before. It carried a tone of surprise, maybe even respect. She didn't say anything. She just took her usual seat in the back, placed her notebook on the desk, and waited for the lesson to begin. But she could feel the change in the air. For the first time, people were looking at her, not through her. The teacher entered the room holding a pile of papers and greeted the class. He paused when his eyes met hers for a brief moment, as if he still couldn't forget what he had witnessed the day before. He cleared his throat and said, "Today we'll discuss expression in music, not just notes but emotion." As he spoke, she listened carefully. He talked about how music isn't only about technique or memorizing, but about feeling each note, shaping it with emotion. He said that even a single piece could sound completely different when played by different people. She understood that more than anyone in that room. For her, music was emotion itself, a language that spoke when words couldn't. The teacher then asked for volunteers to play short pieces and demonstrate different moods: joy, sadness, tension, calm. Several students went up one by one. They played well, but something always felt a little forced. The teacher praised their effort but encouraged them to dig deeper. When it was quiet again, he turned toward her. "Would you like to try?" he asked, not as a challenge this time, but as an invitation. She hesitated, but then nodded. She stood, walked to the piano, and took a slow breath before touching the keys. This time she played a soft melody, gentle, flowing, like a conversation between two hearts. The sound filled the room quietly but deeply. No one spoke or moved. The music had life in it, something pure and honest. When she stopped, the room was silent again. The teacher looked at her thoughtfully. "That," he said slowly, "is what real music sounds like." A few students clapped softly. She smiled politely and returned to her seat, her heart calm and steady. From that day, everything started to shift. People began approaching her during breaks, asking about her technique, about how she learned to play like that. She never gave long answers. She simply said she practiced a lot, but inside she knew it wasn't just practice. It was her heart speaking through her hands. The following week, a notice appeared on the academy board. It announced an upcoming event, the annual student concert. It was the biggest event of the year, attended by families, local musicians, and even some well-known performers. Every student dreamed of being chosen to perform. The teacher explained that each class would select 2 performers, one for a solo and one for a duet. The auditions would take place in a few days. The room buzzed with excitement. Everyone began planning what they would play. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she wanted to audition. The memory of her last public performance, the one she played before her mother passed away, still made her heart ache. Since then, every time she played in front of others, she felt like her mother should have been there beside her. The thought of facing a big crowd again filled her with quiet fear. But fate wasn't done testing her yet. One afternoon, when most students had gone home, she stayed behind to practice. She thought she was alone, but the teacher walked in quietly, standing by the door for a while before speaking. "You should audition," he said finally. She looked up, surprised. "I don't know if I'm ready," she replied softly. He shook his head. "You're more than ready. You just don't see it yet." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the concert, about her mother, about the way music once made her feel alive. The next morning, she signed her name on the audition list. When the day came, the atmosphere in the hall was thick with nervous energy. Each student had to play for 3 teachers sitting at a long table. Some played fast, others slow. Some stumbled over notes, others smiled through their mistakes. She was near the end of the list. Sitting quietly, she watched each performance, her hands clasped in her lap. When her name was finally called, her heartbeat quickened. She walked to the piano slowly, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She could almost hear her mother's voice saying, "Play like you're talking to me." And then she began. The melody started soft, rising and falling gently like waves. As it grew stronger, the rhythm carried emotion that reached everyone listening. Her fingers moved without hesitation, her face calm but full of feeling. The teachers leaned forward slightly and the entire room grew still. When she finished, the silence lasted longer than usual. One of the teachers cleared his throat and said, "Thank you." That was all, but it was enough. She left the hall quietly, unsure what to think. But deep down, she knew she had played with all her heart. The next day, the results were posted. Her name was at the top, chosen as the solo performer for the concert. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then slowly, a small smile appeared on her face. Word spread quickly. Some students congratulated her, genuinely impressed. Others, though, couldn't hide their envy. One of them said loudly in the hallway, "Guess the teacher just likes quiet players now." Another laughed, pretending to play an invisible piano. She heard them, but she didn't respond. Instead, she kept practicing. Morning, noon, and even late in the evening when the halls were almost empty. The janitor would sometimes peek in and shake his head with a small smile. "You really love that piano, don't you?" he'd say. She would just nod. Every note she played seemed to draw her closer to something she'd lost long ago. Confidence, peace, maybe even joy. For the first time in years, she didn't just play to remember her mother. She played to honor her. One evening while practicing, she noticed the same strict teacher standing by the door again. He didn't interrupt, just listened quietly. When she finished, he said, "You've grown even in these few days." She looked up. "Do you really think I'm ready for the concert?" He smiled slightly. "You were ready the day you first touched those keys." Those words stayed with her. When the day of the concert finally arrived, the academy was decorated beautifully. Lights hung above the stage, and the sound of tuning instruments filled the air. The large hall was crowded. Parents, students, and even a few local reporters had come. She sat backstage, dressed simply, her hands resting on her lap. She could hear the faint applause as other performances went on. Her turn was near. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to calm herself. The teacher came over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "don't play for them. Play for yourself." When her name was announced, she walked to the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, which helped. She sat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench, and let her fingers rest gently on the keys. The first note echoed beautifully across the hall. It was followed by another and another, each flowing into the next like a conversation she had waited years to have. The sound filled every corner of the room. Her performance wasn't just skillful, it was emotional. It spoke of loss, hope, and quiet strength. The audience felt every bit of it. Some people even wiped their eyes without knowing why. When the final note faded into silence, she slowly lifted her hands off the keys. The stillness lasted for a few seconds. Then came the applause. Loud, long, and full of emotion, she stood, bowed gently, and walked off the stage. Her heart was light. She didn't think about winning or praise. She just felt at peace. Backstage, the teacher was waiting with a smile. That, he said, was not just music. That was truth. She smiled back, her eyes glistening. That night, as she walked home under the quiet stars, she felt something new. Not pride, but belonging. For so long she had played only for herself, afraid of being seen. Now she realized music was meant to be shared. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about speaking from the heart, and finally she had. The day after the concert, the music academy was buzzing with talk. Wherever she went, she could hear bits and pieces of whispers. Students discussing her performance, teachers quietly praising her in the hallways, and even the janitor saying to someone, "That girl's music had something in it, something real." She walked through the corridors quietly, pretending not to hear, though her heart felt warm. It wasn't pride that filled her, but a strange sense of peace. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. People were finally seeing what she had been hiding all this time. In class, the teacher greeted her with a smile. A real one. "Your performance last night was remarkable," he said. "You've reminded all of us why we love this art." The rest of the class clapped lightly. Some students still seemed unsure how to treat her. A few were shy, others more open. But everyone's tone had changed. The quiet girl who once sat unnoticed had become someone they now looked up to, even if they didn't fully understand her. That day, the teacher began a new topic: musical storytelling. He explained how every piece tells a story even without words. Music, he said, is not about showing how skilled you are. It's about showing who you are. Those words stayed with her. As the days passed, the teacher began to ask her to play during lessons. He wanted the other students to observe her expression and timing. She didn't like attention, but she didn't refuse either. Every time she sat at the piano, something magical happened. The room grew quiet, and even the students who used to mock her listened closely. One afternoon, the head of the academy visited their class. It wasn't a common thing. The teacher introduced him and said he had heard about the concert performance. The head smiled at her kindly and said, "We are proud to have talent like yours in our school. We'd like you to represent the academy at the upcoming city competition." The room gasped softly. The city competition was a big event, where the best students from different schools performed in front of judges and musicians. It was an honor and a pressure. She froze for a moment, unsure what to say. The teacher looked at her encouragingly. You don't have to decide right now, he said gently. Think about it. That evening, she walked home slowly. The sky was glowing orange with the setting sun. She thought about the offer. A part of her wanted to say yes to challenge herself again, but another part whispered fear. The fear of failing, of disappointing others, of being seen too much. At home, she sat by her small piano. The keys felt familiar and comforting under her fingers. She began to play softly without thinking. It wasn't a known piece, and just a melody that came from inside her. It was calm and tender, filled with emotions she couldn't put into words. As she played, she realized that performing wasn't about being perfect. It was about sharing something honest. The next day, she told the teacher she would do it. Preparation for the competition began right away. The teacher worked with her after classes, helping her polish her performance. He was patient but demanding. You don't need to impress the judges, he told her one day. You just need to move them. Her classmates often stayed back to listen. Slowly, admiration replaced jealousy. Some even asked if she could help them with their own practice. She always agreed, smiling shyly. She never made anyone feel small. If someone struggled, she would show them gently how to fix a mistake. Her quiet kindness started to change the atmosphere of the class. People began to support one another more. A few days before the competition, the teacher told her to take a break. You've practiced enough, he said. Now let the music rest inside you. But she couldn't stay away from the piano. She went to the small practice room after hours. The lights were dim and the room felt peaceful. She played softly just for herself. She didn't notice the teacher standing by the door listening. When she finished, he said quietly, You play differently when you think no one is watching. That's when you're at your best. She smiled, a little embarrassed. That's when I forget to be afraid, she said. The day of the competition arrived faster than she expected. The venue was large, filled with bright lights and rows of seats. She could hear the faint sounds of tuning instruments and voices echoing in the background. Students from other schools were warming up, some laughing, others nervously pacing. She found a quiet corner and closed her eyes. The sound of her heartbeat was steady. She wasn't nervous, not like before. She felt ready, not to win, but to play. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage calmly. The judges sat behind a long table, notebooks in front of them. The audience watched silently. She bowed slightly and sat at the piano. The first few notes flowed smoothly. The melody was graceful and strong at the same time. Her hands moved like they knew exactly where to go, and not rushed, not forced. Every touch carried meaning. The room seemed to breathe with her playing. The judges leaned forward, clearly moved. Even the students from other schools watched in awe. The music filled the hall, soft, emotional, powerful. It felt like she wasn't just playing the piano. She was speaking through it. When she finished, there was a pause before the applause began. The sound rose and filled the space, echoing for several long seconds. She stood, bowed again, and walked off the stage quietly, her heart calm. Backstage, the teacher was waiting. He didn't say much, just a quiet, I'm proud of you. Later, when the results were announced, she was named the top performer of the competition. The applause that followed was loud, but she barely heard it. She only felt a deep sense of peace. The next week, her picture was on the Academy's notice board, along with a short article praising her achievement. Students stopped her in the hallways to congratulate her. The ones who had once ignored her now smiled openly, calling her their inspiration. The teacher started using her performance as an example in other classes. This, he said, is what it means to play with your heart. But despite all the praise, she didn't let it change her. She still came early to class, still practiced quietly after hours, and still helped others whenever they asked. She wasn't chasing fame. She just loved music. Over time, her influence began to show. The academy itself started to feel warmer. Students encouraged each other more. The teachers became more patient. The girl who once sat alone had somehow brought everyone closer together. One afternoon, after class, the teacher asked her to stay behind. He handed her a small envelope. This is an invitation, he said. There's a local orchestra that holds a summer program for gifted musicians. They'd like you to join. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter with her name printed neatly at the top. Her eyes widened. It wasn't just a program. It was an opportunity to play with professional musicians, to learn from some of the best. She looked up at the teacher, unsure what to say. He smiled and said, "You've earned it. Don't doubt yourself." That night, she sat by her piano again, the letter resting beside her. The idea of performing with real musicians both scared and excited her. But as she began to play softly, she realized that every step she had taken, from being the quiet girl no one noticed to standing on big stages, had led her to this moment. Music had always been her safe place, but now it had become her voice. She didn't know where this new path would lead, but one thing was certain: she was no longer afraid of being heard. She finished playing and looked out the small window beside her. The moonlight fell gently across the piano keys, and for a moment, she felt as though her mother was there, smiling quietly in the light. She whispered softly, "I'm still playing, just like you taught me." Then she placed her hand over her heart and smiled. A real, peaceful smile. The journey that had started in silence was now filled with music that touched every soul who heard it. And this, she knew, was only the beginning. Weeks passed after the city competition, but her name still echoed through the halls of the academy. Teachers mentioned her during lessons, and new students spoke about her as if she were a legend. Yet she never acted like one. She still arrived early, still helped others, and still practiced quietly when the classrooms were empty. She didn't care for praise. What mattered to her was the sound of the keys, the rhythm that came from her heart, and the calm feeling that only music could give her. But life was changing quickly, and she could feel it. One morning as she entered the academy, the teacher called her into his office. He had a gentle but serious look. On his desk was a letter with an official stamp. "This came for you," he said, handing it to her. She looked at it curiously. When she opened it, her eyes widened. It was an invitation, and a formal one, from the National Music Council. They wanted her to perform at a youth concert that would feature talented musicians from across the country. The teacher smiled softly. "You've impressed more people than you realize," he said. "This is a great opportunity. You'll be performing on a much bigger stage now." She didn't know what to say. It felt unreal. Just months ago, she had been the quiet girl sitting in the back of the classroom. Now she was being invited to play among the best. When she told her classmates, they were excited for her. Some even offered to help her prepare. The academy felt alive again, filled with energy and hope. Everyone wanted to see her succeed, but inside her heart she felt something more complicated. Happiness, yes, but also a bit of fear. What if she couldn't live up to their expectations? What if the people there didn't feel her music the way others had? That night she sat by her piano and played the same melody she always played when she felt unsure. It was the one her mother had taught her when she was little, the song that made her believe music was a language of the soul. As her fingers moved gently across the keys, she whispered, "I hope you're still listening." "Mama." The sound filled the small room softly, like a conversation between the living and the memory of love. The next few weeks were full of preparation. The teacher helped her choose a piece that suited her style. Something emotional, something honest. He didn't push her to play something complicated. "People don't remember how fast you play," he told her. "They remember how you make them feel." She practiced every day, not because she wanted perfection, but because she wanted truth in her music. Sometimes when she played, she could almost feel her mother's hands over hers, guiding her gently like old times. Finally, the day of the national concert arrived. The venue was grand, far bigger than anything she had ever seen. The hall had tall ceilings, golden lights, and rows upon rows of seats that seemed to stretch endlessly. As she stood backstage, watching other performers go before her hands trembled slightly. Each performer was brilliant, their confidence, their poise, their style. She began to doubt herself again. She stepped away to find a quiet corner. Her teacher found her there and said softly, "Are you nervous?" She nodded. He smiled kindly. "Good, that means you care. Just remember, you don't have to play louder than anyone else. You just have to play like you." Those words settled in her heart like a warm light. When her name was announced, she walked to the stage slowly. The applause was polite but distant. No one knew her yet. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost fragile. But as the melody grew, her hands found their confidence. The music flowed out of her like a river that had been waiting to be free. It wasn't just sound, it was emotion. Each note carried memories of long nights of practice, of loneliness, of loss, and of love. The audience grew silent. Even the smallest sound, the shuffle of a foot or the creak of a chair, seemed to disappear. People leaned forward, completely drawn in. As the piece reached its peak, her hands moved faster, her eyes closed, her face calm but full of expression. It was as if she wasn't playing the piano. She was speaking through it. When the final note faded, the silence lasted longer than usual. Then came the applause. Not polite this time, but full and powerful. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even shouting her name. She bowed quietly, her eyes glistening. She didn't think about winning or losing. She just felt grateful. Backstage, her teacher met her with a proud smile. "You've done something beautiful tonight," he said. When the results were announced later, she had won first place. But even more meaningful to her was when one of the judges, an older pianist, came up and said softly, "You remind me why I fell in love with music." She didn't know how to respond. She simply smiled and said, "Thank you." After that night, everything changed again. Articles were written about her performance. Videos of her playing were shared online, and people began calling her the quiet prodigy. Her name reached far beyond the academy, but she didn't let it go to her head. Fame didn't interest her. All she wanted was to keep playing honestly, the same way she always had. She still returned to the academy every morning, helping other students and practicing in her favorite small room. When new students arrived, the teacher would often say, "Do you see her? That's what it looks like when someone truly loves music." One afternoon, she was asked to give a short talk to the younger students. Standing before them, she looked nervous at first, but then she smiled and said simply, "When I first came here, I was afraid to play. I thought I wasn't good enough. But music isn't about being perfect, and it's about being real. Don't play to impress people. Play to express yourself." The room filled with quiet admiration. The students clapped softly, inspired by her gentle sincerity. Afterward, one young boy came up to her. He looked shy and held a sheet of music in his hand. I get scared when I play in front of people," he said softly. "What should I do?" She smiled warmly and said, "Close your eyes and imagine you're talking to someone who really understands you. Then play." The boy nodded, and she gently patted his shoulder. Moments like that made her heart full. It wasn't about stages or trophies, it was about sharing what she loved. But as her reputation grew, she began to receive invitations from bigger places. Orchestras, television programs, even international schools. Each letter felt heavier than the last. The teacher watched her carefully. He knew fame could be a beautiful thing, but also a lonely one. One day she asked him quietly, "Do you think I should go?" He smiled gently. "Only if it makes you happy. Don't chase what doesn't feel right. The world will wait if your heart isn't ready." She thought about it for a long time. That evening, she returned to her small piano at home. The old keys creaked slightly, but she loved that sound. It reminded her where she came from. She began to play, and not for a stage, not for applause, but just for herself. The melody drifted through the open window, mixing with the sound of the evening breeze. As she played, she realized something. The world might now call her a genius, but to her, she was still the same girl who played to feel close to her mother. The same girl who found peace in the sound of a piano in a quiet room. She didn't need big lights or cameras to feel fulfilled. Her music had already done what it was meant to do. It had touched hearts, healed wounds, and inspired others to believe in their own quiet strength. When she finished playing, she looked up at the ceiling softly lit by the lamp and whispered, "Thank you. Mama, I think you'd be proud." The wind outside grew stronger, and for a moment, she felt like the world was answering her. She smiled to herself, placed her hands back on the keys, and began another song. One that she hadn't played before, one that belonged only to her story. And as the gentle sound filled the night, it was clear that her journey, though already remarkable, was still unfolding. She had learned that real genius isn't about being noticed. It's about never losing the heart that made you start in the first place. After the national concert, life began to move faster than she ever imagined. It was as if the quiet girl who once practiced alone had suddenly been pulled into a bright, rushing world. Invitations started arriving from every direction. Music schools wanted her to visit. Journalists asked for interviews. Some even wanted to make documentaries about her story. At first, she didn't know how to handle all the attention. Her teacher tried to help her stay grounded. Don't lose your calm, he told her. The world will speak loudly, but you don't have to shout back. Just keep doing what you love. She tried to remember those words. But it wasn't easy. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. They wanted photos, autographs, even small pieces of advice. Some were kind and sincere. Others just wanted to be near someone famous. Sometimes she smiled and thanked them. Other times she felt like hiding away. The noise of fame could be louder than music. Soon she received an invitation to perform in another country. A grand concert in Europe where top young musicians would play together. It was an honor beyond anything she had expected. Her teacher encouraged her to go, saying it would help her grow not just as a pianist but as a person. So she agreed. The journey itself was long, filled with moments of quiet reflection. As the airplane flew over the clouds, she looked out the window and thought about how far she'd come. From that small piano at home to international stages, it all felt like a dream. When she arrived, the new environment overwhelmed her. Everything was unfamiliar. The streets, the language, the food, even the way people greeted each other. But music didn't need translation. It was the same everywhere. Rehearsals began a few days later. The other musicians were talented, confident, and well-trained. Many of them had been studying in famous institutions since childhood. When they heard she came from a small academy, some looked surprised. A few even whispered to each other, wondering if she truly belonged there. But she didn't let their doubts shake her. She stayed quiet, polite, and focused. Every night she practiced in her hotel room, repeating the same sections until her fingers knew the music by heart. On the day of the performance, the concert hall was massive. Elegant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the seats were filled with people from all over the world. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone wanted to prove something. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage slowly, breathing deeply to steady her heart. The moment she touched the piano, the world around her seemed to disappear. She played not to impress anyone, but to share something honest. The melody rose gently, full of warmth and emotion. It spoke of her past, the struggles, the loneliness, the quiet victories. By the time she finished, the audience was silent for a few seconds before breaking into loud applause. She bowed, her heart full. After the show, several famous musicians approached her. One of them said, "Your playing isn't just skilled, it's alive. You remind us why we started playing in the first place." That night, as she sat by the hotel window looking at the city lights, she smiled softly. The applause had been nice, but what stayed with her was that comment, the idea that her music could make others remember their love for it. That was worth more than any prize. When she returned home, the academy held a small celebration. The students gathered around her, asking about the places she'd seen and the people she'd met. She told them stories about different instruments, different cultures, and how music could connect strangers. Her teacher looked on proudly, saying, "You've gone far, but you've stayed humble. That's what makes you special." Still, with success came new challenges. Her schedule filled up with interviews, recordings, and performances. Sometimes she missed the simple days when she could play just for herself. Now there were cameras, deadlines, and constant expectations. One evening, after a long day of practice and meetings, she sat alone in the empty hall. The lights were dim and the silence felt heavy. She placed her fingers on the keys but didn't play. For the first time, she felt tired, not in her hands but in her heart. Her teacher walked in quietly and sat beside her. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," he said softly. She looked at him with tired eyes. "It's just, everything feels different now. Everyone's watching. Sometimes I forget why I started playing." He nodded slowly. "That happens to many artists. But you must never forget the little girl who played to feel close to her mother. She's still inside you. Let her guide you again." His words hit deep. That night, she went home and played the same old melody her mother had once taught her. The familiar notes filled her small room, bringing back memories of love, warmth, and simplicity. She realized she didn't need to chase success. All she needed was to stay true to her heart. A few months later, she made a surprising decision. She took a short break from performing. The world was shocked. People wondered why someone at the height of her fame would stop. But she knew why. She wanted to reconnect with the simple joy of music again. During her break, she started teaching at the academy part-time. She helped beginners learn their first songs, often sitting beside them patiently as they stumbled through mistakes. She told them stories about how she had once struggled the same way. The students loved her. They said her lessons weren't just about piano, they were about life. She taught them to listen, to feel, and to believe that mistakes were part of growth. One afternoon, a young girl came to her after class. She was shy and hesitant, reminding her so much of her younger self. The girl said softly, "I get scared when people watch me play. My hands start shaking." She smiled gently and replied, "Close your eyes and imagine it's just you and the piano. Forget the crowd. The music will take care of the rest." The little girl nodded and smiled, comforted by her kindness. Word spread about how her teaching style inspired students to love music instead of fearing it. More and more people came to the academy just to learn from her. She didn't see herself as a mentor, but she was becoming one, quietly, naturally. During that time, she also began writing her own compositions, small, emotional pieces inspired by her life. Some were soft and peaceful, others carried deep feelings of longing and hope. When she played them in front of her students, they often sat in silence, moved by the honesty in her melodies. Her teacher once listened to one of her new songs and said with a smile, "This is you, completely you. Not someone else's notes, not anyone's expectations, just your story and sound." She realized then that true art comes when you stop trying to please others and start speaking from the heart. Months passed, and she started performing again. But this time it felt different. She wasn't doing it for fame or recognition. She played because it was part of who she was. Her performances were more emotional, more peaceful. People who came to listen often said they left feeling lighter, as if her music had spoken directly to their souls. Even those who didn't understand much about classical music found themselves touched. It was something beyond words. One day, after a small concert at a local community center, an old woman approached her. The woman's eyes were filled with tears. She said softly, "I lost my husband last year. I stopped listening to music because it hurt too much. But tonight your playing made me remember him with love instead of pain. Thank you." That moment stayed with her. She realized that her gift wasn't meant to make her famous. It was meant to heal, to comfort, to remind people of their own stories. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Music isn't about notes or speed. It's about emotion. If I can make someone feel understood through my playing, that's enough." As the months turned into a year, she continued to balance both worlds, performing and teaching. She became a bridge between dreamers and reality, between sound and feeling. Sometimes, when she looked back at how it all began, the days when her teachers doubted her, when she played in silence just to be heard and she smiled, every step, every mistake, every tear had shaped her into who she was now. And even though the world saw her as a prodigy, she knew the truth. She was just someone who loved the piano deeply, and that love had carried her farther than she ever thought possible. Time had passed, but the girl who once sat quietly in the back of the academy had changed the world around her in ways she had never imagined. She had become more than a talented pianist. She had become a guide, a quiet light for anyone who had ever doubted themselves. It was a rainy afternoon when she returned to her old practice room. The soft drumming of raindrops on the windows matched the rhythm of her thoughts. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment she hesitated. This was the first time in weeks she had allowed herself to play alone, without anyone watching, without an audience to impress. She closed her eyes and let her memory drift back to her mother. The early mornings, the late nights, the small hands guiding hers across the keys. The thought of those moments made her heart ache and smile at the same time. She pressed the first key softly, letting the note linger. The melody that followed was slow, delicate, and intimate. Each note carried her memories, her struggles, her victories, and her quiet joy. She realized that all the competitions, the applause, the international stages, none of that mattered as much as this moment. Here she was free. Here she was herself. As she played, a knock came at the door. She didn't stop. A familiar voice spoke softly, "May I come in?" It was her teacher. He smiled warmly as he stepped inside and watched her play. "You've grown so much," he said quietly. "And yet when you play like this, you're the same girl I met that first day." She stopped for a moment and looked at him. "I've learned a lot," she said. But I've also remembered who I am, he nodded. That's what makes your music special. It's not just about skill. It's about honesty. You've inspired so many people, students, audiences, even me, and yet you've never let it change your heart. Her teacher's words reminded her of all the journeys she had been through, the quiet days of practice, the nervous performances, the applause, the travels, and the stories she had collected along the way. But more than anything, it reminded her why she had started, for love, for connection, and for the joy of playing. That evening, she walked home through the rain. The streets glistened under the lamplight, and the sound of water falling into puddles created a gentle rhythm. For a moment she paused and listened. It was almost like the world was playing music with her, soft, imperfect, but full of life. Back at home, she sat at her small piano again. She thought about the children she had taught, the beginners she had helped, and the students who now smiled at her guidance with hope in their eyes. She realized that her music had a purpose far beyond applause. It had the power to heal, to encourage, and to give courage to those who had once felt invisible. She began to write a new piece, one that had never existed before. The melody was different from anything she had played publicly. It was personal, reflective, and full of emotion she had kept inside for years. As she composed, she felt her heart open, and the music seemed to flow not from her hands, but from something deeper inside. A few weeks later, the Academy announced a special event, a concert dedicated not to competition but to the love of music itself. Students, teachers, and members of the local community would gather to celebrate creativity, expression, and the joy of playing. The girl was asked to perform. She accepted not because it was an honor, but because she wanted to share this piece with others. On the day of the concert, the hall was filled with familiar faces, students she had taught, teachers she had worked with, families who had come to listen, and even some of the children who had watched her play years ago. The atmosphere was warm, soft, and inviting. She walked to the grand piano, taking a slow breath. She didn't feel nervous. Instead, she felt connected, to the room, to her music, and to the people who had been part of her journey. She pressed the first key. The note resonated deeply in the hall. As she played, the melody grew. It was gentle, reflective, and emotional. Each phrase told a story. The quiet nights of practice, the moments of fear, the victories on stage, the love she carried for her mother, and the joy she had discovered in helping others. The audience listened in silence. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Some wiped tears from their cheeks, moved by the honesty in each note. No one clapped in the middle. They simply listened. They felt her story unfold through her hands. When the final chord faded, the room was still for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. Not loud or frantic, but heartfelt. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, and smiling. She stood and bowed, tears in her eyes. This time she wasn't thinking about recognition or awards. She was thinking about connection, about how music had brought everyone together in that moment. After the performance, a little girl ran up to her. "I want to play like you someday," she said shyly. The pianist knelt and smiled gently. "You can," she said softly. "But the most important thing is to play from your heart. That's what makes music alive." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. Later, as the hall emptied, she walked outside into the quiet night. The streets were calm, the air crisp and fresh. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the shy, quiet girl who had once been overlooked, the long hours of practice, the fear of performing, the applause, and the recognition. And yet, the most important lesson had never been about any of those things. It had been about staying true to herself. She realized that music wasn't just a talent. It was a gift, a bridge between people, a way to tell a story when words weren't enough. It could comfort, inspire, and heal, and she had been given the chance to share that gift. As she walked home, she felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. She didn't need fame or awards to validate her talent. She didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. She simply needed to keep playing, to keep expressing, and to keep touching hearts in her own quiet way. Back at home, she opened her small notebook and began to write. Not music this time, but thoughts, feelings, and memories. She wrote about the concerts, the journeys, the students she had taught, and the moments of doubt and fear she had overcome. She wrote because she wanted to remember everything, not for anyone else, but for herself. That night she played again, her fingers moving effortlessly across the keys. The melody was soft, peaceful, and complete. It carried her love, her loss, her joy, and her hope. She smiled as she played, feeling as though she were speaking to her mother once more. The music seemed endless, yet perfect in its own way. She played until her fingers grew tired, and then she stopped. She didn't feel empty. She felt full of life, love, and purpose. She realized then that her journey was not about being noticed or celebrated. It was about connection, about staying true to her heart, and about using her music to touch lives. And in that moment, she understood something deeply. Her gift was not just for her, it was for everyone who needed to hear it, for everyone who had ever felt invisible, lonely, or afraid. As she placed her hands gently on her lap and looked out the window at the quiet city, she whispered softly, "Thank you," for all the people she had met, all the stages she had played on, and all the hearts she had touched. She felt a profound sense of gratitude. Music had saved her, shaped her, and given her a voice. And in sharing it, she had found her true purpose. That night, she went to bed with a calm heart. She knew that her journey would continue, that she would face new challenges, travel to new places, and meet new people. But she also knew that no matter where life took her, she would never forget the little girl who once played alone in a quiet room, and she would never stop sharing the music that flowed from her soul. The world might remember her as a prodigy, a genius, a performer, but she would always remember herself simply as a girl who loved to play, who learned to be brave, and who discovered that music could speak when words could not. And with that thought, she drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with melodies that had yet to be played, stories that had yet to be told, and a life that had only just begun. The piano waited quietly in the corner, ready for the next note, the next story, the next heart to touch, and she knew she would be ready.